All right, I think we are live here. Great. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining today. My name is Cody Smith, and I'm a policy associate at the Center for Rural Affairs. I have been with the center about 2.5 years or so. And my role at the center is that I manage our Iowa state policy portfolio as it relates to water resources and renewable energy here across the state. So we're going to spend some time today reviewing the results of the Our Iowa, Our Water survey, which we released over the summer. And we're going to look at what rural Iowans think about the management of water resources in the state, including flood mitigation and water quality. But before we get into that, I'm going to take a minute to review a little bit more about what the Center for Rural Affairs is, who we are, and why we do the work that we do. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to have conversation with you about, why you're joining or what you're interested in. But the Center for Rural Affairs was founded in 1973 in rural Northeast Nebraska. And actually our home office remains in Northeast Nebraska in a small town called Lyons, Nebraska. Many of you may be familiar with our location there. We also have staff located in South Dakota and Minnesota. And I'm located in our Nevada, Iowa office, along with 3 of my other colleagues. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we do here at the center is work on state policy in Iowa as it relates to water resources. And the reason that we do the work that we do in this space is because we believe that rural Iowans should have a say in the decisions that impact their communities. And that really is a driving force behind a lot of the work that we do here at the Center for Rural Affairs. So a lot of that is related to flooding and water quality and making sure that rural Iowans have the infrastructure, the information, and the ability to act on both of those in the name of reducing flood risks for their community and improving water quality. So one of the things that we wanted to do was make sure we're going down the right path. So this summer, we released the Our Iowa, Our Water survey. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, just so that is up. You should be able to see that here. And I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the results of our survey. So we released the survey on June 1st, and we closed it a little bit over a month later on July 6th. We had about 396 responses that are counted in this information here, but we ended up with a little over 400 actually. So we were pretty excited about the response rate that we got from rural Iowans. And I wanted to take a minute to talk about the survey methodology because I think that's really important for establishing any credibility around surveys, because I think we've all seen a lot of surveys and kind of question the nature of them. So what we did is we used our information sources through the Voter Access Network and other sources to look at the addresses of people who live in the most rural state house district across Iowa. So I looked at the state map that's provided on the legislature's website and identified the house districts that are the most geographically large, meaning that they have the most geographically spread out population of people, because there's roughly about the same amount in every one. So the larger ones are a good indication of how rural or not rural one of those can be. So what I did is I removed a lot of those state house districts that really were any less rural than the ones surrounding Ames. So for example, I didn't include the one that I live in, and I'm just west of Ames, Iowa. So that's some of the methodology there. And we wanted to make sure that we sent it to folks who opened their mail. That way we know that they would get our letter, they would at least open it, hopefully engage with us. So we did mail it to about 1,268 Iowans in those state house districts I just described. And we also posted it online and on the Center for Rural Affairs website and social media platforms. When we posted it online, the same link was included in that mailed survey letter. So if you got the letter in the mail, you could go online and take it and fill it out that way, so you'd have to mail it back. We had about 50-50 participation on the mailed surveys and our online responses. So I think is a really good indication of how rural Iowans actually feel about this issue. So I also want to talk a little bit about who took the survey. So we asked, what is your occupation? Now, these are all self-identified, so we had no role to play in identifying, who said what and where. But I thought it was very noteworthy that we had about 143 farmers and landowners who took the survey. That really helps us kind of get a gauge of who's taking the survey. As you can see, a lot of retired folks, a lot of retired rural Iowans took this survey. Pretty excited to have their input as well. Other notable groups included some small business, either employees or owners. We had a lot of nonprofit folks, natural resources professionals, and a couple of local elected officials too, and some state officials as well. So I thought it was really great to get that diversity of responses. The first thing that we wanted to do in regard to flooding was ask, are you concerned about flooding at the state level and then in your community? As you can see here, only 2.6% either said they were not concerned or that they were unsure. So that means like 97% of the respondents said that they were concerned about flooding in the state of Iowa. Pretty remarkable. And obviously the highest amount of folks there said very concerned. Now the difference here at this one is scale. So we asked, are you concerned about flooding in your community? Obviously much different results than what was shown above at the state level, but that's to be expected. For example, I live west of Ames, as I had mentioned, in rural Boone County. I don't have a lot of flooding concerns around here because I'm not next to a waterway. And so if I lived in Hamburg, for example, in Southwest Iowa, I'd probably have a lot greater level of concern for my community. So I thought that was really interesting. But again, a lot of folks, most folks, a clear majority of them indicated a level of concern for community flooding as well. Then we wanted to talk about who do rural Iowans think have a responsibility in addressing flooding in their communities, whether it's inside the residential areas or at the farm level or whatever that looks like. We wanted to ask and get some opinions there. So we asked about local policymakers. 59% said yes, they do believe that local policymakers, including those three listed above there, should be doing more. And so I think that's really notable. Then we asked about the next level up. So do you think policymakers at the state level should be doing more to address flooding in your community, at the state level? And you can see that 85% of them indicated that state representatives, senators, and the governor, agencies was another example that we provided, should be doing more to address flooding. 85% of rural Iowans believe that that is the case. When we look at policymakers at the federal level, we wanted to keep some consistency. We don't necessarily work a lot on federal flood mitigation policy, but we think it's important to indicate, where do rural Iowans think that these resources should be coming from? And again, 80% said yes, the federal government, including senators, representatives, and federal agencies, should be doing more. Then we switched over to water quality. Obviously, this is a hot topic in Iowa, and you can see here the level of concern about the quality of the water in lakes, rivers, and streams across the state was very high. When we looked at flooding, it was a little bit smaller, about very concerned. I think it was about 55% compared to the 73 almost. So 73% said, we're very concerned about this. And again, it was notable, only 1.8% said, no, I'm not concerned at all. So that means more than 98% of Iowans, rural Iowans specifically, said, yes, we're concerned about water quality in the state of Iowa. And then again, we broke it down by scale. How do you feel about the quality of the water in the lakes, rivers, and streams in your community? Again, quite a high level of concern, very indicative of a widespread care about this issue and obviously some appetite for doing something differently. Only about 4.7% said, no, I'm not concerned, or they just didn't answer and were unsure. So I wanted to talk about one of the ways that we address this at the Center for Rural Affairs. We believe it's really important, again, that local residents have a say in charting their own path forward for success in these areas, including flood mitigation and water quality. So we asked about one of the ways that we typically support these efforts, and that is developing long-term watershed plans, which means that they're essentially bringing a community together to write and set goals for the future, for reducing flood risk, for improving water quality. We asked this question, and are you generally supportive of watershed planning? 89.9% of rural Iowans said yes, and we were thrilled to see that because we do think it's an important way to bring all of those voices to the table and figure out the next steps forward. Only 2% said no. So we wanted to ask again about responsibility for action. About 75% of Iowans said that makers at the local level should direct more financial resources, being a little bit more specific there, more financial resources to help develop those watershed-focused plans that both reduce flooding and improve water quality, so combining them. You can see that a lot more people were sort of unsure in this section, about 17%, which is understandable and puts the onus on us about, making sure that rural Iowans have the resources that they need to pressure their local officials to do more in this space. Iowa state officials, I thought that this was really notable given the work that we do at the Capitol every legislative session. Do you think the state officials should direct more financial resources, again, being specific, to help develop watershed-focused plans to reduce flooding and improve water quality? Again, a resounding 85, almost 86% of rural Iowans said yes here. Some were unsure, again, and then some were saying no. And that's totally fine. But what we're excited to see is that we agree that the state should be supporting more efforts tied to funding and providing financial resources for staffing, for example, watershed coordinators who are actually writing these plans and leading the development of them, and the communication with farmers and landowners about how we can get these practices on the ground. And it seems to me that about 86% of rural Iowans also agree with that. And again, asking for consistency at the federal level, 85% of folks said, yes, we do think that the federal government should have a role in kicking in more financial resources for helping put together these watershed management plans. So this is something that's interesting and has a lot of history in Iowa. So we asked about what's commonly referred to as Iowa's water and land legacy. Many of you may be familiar with the fact that in 2010, 63% of Iowa voters approved via ballot initiative the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, again known as IWIL. And that just said that we would raise the state sales tax by 3/8 of 1 cent to fund natural resources and outdoor recreation projects. Unfortunately, more than a decade later, we're still sitting here with absolutely no money in there. And there's still widespread support for this. 75% gave a resounding yes there. 10% were either unsure or they did not answer the question on the survey, and only 14% said no. So again, demonstrating widespread support for this fund moving forward. One thing that was really interesting and we wanted to measure was the support for the original IWIL proposal and the support for Governor Reynolds' Invest in Iowa Act proposal. We asked the question here and referenced IWIL just so people kind of commonly knew what we were referring to. And this proposal that the governor introduced in the 2020 legislative session, so the previous one, said that she was going to raise the state sales tax by 1 cent to fund mental health services, reduce income taxes, and then the third component is to fund IWIL, give that 3/8 of 1 cent to that Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. You can see that between the original IWIL question about just the 3/8 and this 1 cent question about the Invest in Iowa Act, there's considerable differences, but there's still a pretty clear majority of rural Iowans that said, yes, we support the governor's Invest in Iowa Act, and we think that it should move forward. 17% said, I don't know, or they said, I'm not going to answer the question. And then, of course, almost 23% said no. So asking about some of the other work that we do here at the center, which is focused on federal working lands conservation programs. If you're a farmer or a landowner, you may be familiar with the Conservation Stewardship Program or the Environmental Quality and Incentives Program, commonly referred to as CSP and EQIP. We wanted to ask about support for giving funding from the federal level to farmers to invest in conservation. And about 77% of Iowans, rural Iowans specifically, said, yes, we support that. So this last part, I think, is really key to the work that we do here at the Center for Rural Affairs. We wanted to make sure that we are acting with the best possible information that we can compile at all when we're working on behalf of rural Iowans. So we wanted to ask, as a rural Iowan, who do you trust most to make decisions about improving water quality and then also flooding? This diagram here talks about who they indicated they trust the most to make decisions about improving water quality in their community. You can see that by and large, it was overwhelming support and trust of local officials. So farmers, landowners, small business owners, retired Iowans, all of those folks who we saw took the survey They said, we trust local officials the most out of any of these other options to make decisions about improving water quality in our community. That's really important for the work that we do here at the Center for Rural Affairs, because we work to formulate the infrastructure for folks to act. One of those ways includes watershed management authorities. It's just a voluntary intergovernmental partnership between cities, counties, and soil and water conservation districts that works to not only address water quality and improve that, but also reduce flooding risk for communities. So we're going to continue to take this information and carry that message forward. You can see that state officials ranked second there with 15%. This is again about flood risk in the community that they live in. And again, 60%, even higher than the water quality, 59.6%. 60% said, yes, we trust local officials the most to address flooding in my community. That's really remarkable given that all the other options that were on the table, whether it was federal, state officials, or private industry, even farmers and landowners and others. I will say it was a one question, right? Like, who do you trust the most? But I think it's really good to review who was second and who was third. In water quality, 15%, so second place was state officials. In flood risk, second place again was state officials, but closely followed by farmers and landowners. So I really think it indicates that something like a watershed management authority that I just described is a really good way to bring all of those voices to the table, formulate one of those watershed management plans that reduce flood risk and that improve water quality, and make sure that wherever they get the funding for these activities, whether it's the local level or the state level with programs that are proposed in the Invest in Iowa Act, these organizations are best positioned to fund a coordinator and take all of that money and put it to the best possible return on investment for taxpayer dollars. Because the reality is most of the funding in this space is taxpayer funded. So we want to make sure that we have a plan, a roadmap to success. We're putting these tax dollars into practices in the most impactful areas set by everybody in our community, and we're getting the best return on investment for that money. So I think that is all of the results. So I'm going to just take a second here, see if there's any questions. I didn't see any questions come through, so I will just hang out for just a second and see if my colleague has captured any questions on that. I don't believe that there are any questions, so we will just continue to wrap up here. I appreciate you joining today. Again, this is the Rural Rapport series from the Center for Rural Affairs. We're here every Tuesday at noon. Next week, we'll be covering opportunities for Giving Tuesday. As you may know, Giving Tuesday is a really important opportunity to support the nonprofits that make a difference in your life. And here at the Center for Rural Affairs, this example of water resources work that we just walked through, this is one way that we are spending our resources and our time to make sure that rural Iowa communities have the resources and infrastructure that they need to be successful in reducing flood risk and water quality, and importantly, overall quality of life. So we'll continue to work on that. And I appreciate if you tuned in today. And if you have any questions, again, my name is Cody Smith, and you can reach me at codys@cfra.org or find my information on the website. Thanks again for joining today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.